Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about our coverage of NAMM and CineGear and how that's going and giving you an update and getting your feedback. So stay tuned for that. And again, if you are interested in those details of what we're doing each day, go to officehours.global. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we got?
Our first one this morning comes from Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis, Indiana. He says, what are the panelists' best practices for avoiding light, glare, and or reflections when using teleprompters?
Go ahead, Noah.
I actually have been experimenting with this a lot, and I turned down the brightness of my teleprompter monitor, and I also am using some ND filter, and that's just to try to help with the splashback that you get with the teleprompter. When you're looking at video with color, it's a little different than text, right? So you have a little bit higher chances of that glare. I think this question also might pertain to being in a bright environment in a room, which I'm sure there's other techniques for that as well. High bright monitors would be my go-to, but that's my start right there.
Go ahead, Courtney.
And as far as reflections go, if you wear glasses, you can use a filter like this, which is a polarizing filter. Just put it in front of, it makes you very blurry for a bit of time. Put it in front of your lens and rotate it until the reflections in your glasses disappear, because all LCD monitors have a built-in polarizer. And as you turn the polarizing filter 90 degrees out of axis of the polarizer in the computer screen, its reflection will completely disappear. However, sometimes it will affect the reflection on the surface of your skin. So your skin will take on a little bit different, a little more saturated look with the polarizing filter, depending upon the angle that it's set at.
I have to admit, I actually stopped using I had a polarizing filter and on the light and on myself, and I got rid of it because it was bringing out weird things in my skin, patterns in my skin that I can't see. I kept on looking at myself in the mirror. I'm like, I don't see this. There's a line here and there's a thing here. And
the blood vessels through your skin when you remove the reflections of it. Yeah, so it does.
I decided I had to give it up because I was going to deal with the reflection. Go ahead, Bill.
In traditional teleprompters, you often have the content playback screen at the bottom, then there's the angled beam splitter mirror, and then the camera behind it. And one of the critical factors is to make sure that the behind area is all blocked off from any stray light. Most teleprompters come with a duvetine, and duvetine is a thick black material that keeps light out of things, used commonly in production everywhere. But a duvetine kind of box, sometimes they use black cardboard to make it stiffer and things like that. But basically, it's to keep any light from getting in between the camera lens and the beam splitter glass, so that'll kill a lot of reflections, just making sure that is all done correctly.
Go ahead, Sky.
And if you don't have the duvetine, I've used material called black wrap. It's basically aluminum foil that is a dark coating, and it's very manipulatable, and it's also great for doing snoots on lights as well. So you can manipulate your light and block out that reflective thing that's happening.
Go ahead, Courtney.
One other thing to be aware of, if you're using a high brightness monitor, which is what Josh, I think, mentioned earlier, make sure you have a white text and a black background instead of the inverse, because that monitor, because it's at a 90-degree axis to your lens is here and this is the monitor, it can flare into the lens unless you have some type of lens shade or something that prevents the surface of the lens from being illuminated by the light coming from the teleprompter. And if you're in a really low light situation, if you don't have a lot of light in the room or on the face, it can change your black levels a little bit. So you'll see a bump up in the black levels, and it'll reduce the contrast. It'll be that flare from the teleprompter onto the lens.
We also see that occasionally, depending on the subject matter, with the Interrotron process. So if we're bringing people in that don't have a black background, like a lot of times we bring people in and they're kind of in a box, and so they're blacked out behind them, and then that's not a problem. But if it's a bright scene, so if we're bringing in, like, let's say someone from Zoom, putting them on a teleprompter so that you have eye-to-eye contact, oftentimes we can see a little bit of a black level change, as Courtney said.
Yes, and one problem with that is, I had that happen to me recently, is if you put up a black background behind the person, and you're using a prosumer camera or something as the camera for your Interrotron that has auto gain control, if that person leans out of the shot,
yeah,
the gain will come up on that, because it's all black, will come up drastically. And then when that person comes back into the shot, it's like, very bright, and you'll see that difference show up on camera.
Yeah,
as
we
the
used
player.
that's exactly why we used to do webcams for that person, because they'd be oftentimes somewhere else, and we moved to cameras that we had more control over, specifically because of that auto gain. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, just kind of following up, like when you are doing in Teratron, or if you do any sort of like picture like I'm doing now with the screen and you guys, and I use obviously like a brighter image to come on my screen, you'll see that my image starts to glow. So really the question, like, is there a strategy for Courtney or Alex or somebody with more experience that like could address, a polarizing filter? Would that help? Or like, because I have the full prompter and everything behind it,
For me, it's mostly lower, not trying to push the brightness all the way up. It's keeping it at a level that makes sense. Courtney, did you have anything else to add to that?
Yes, if I can find that mute button. Remember that piece of glass is at a 45-degree angle to your lens. And so it reflects both ways. It reflects the teleprompter image, which is over here, and it reflects the whatever is above the lens directly back into the lens. So while it reflects the monitor back to the talent, it reflects whatever is above the lens back into the lens. So if you don't have a completely flat black, usually it's black velvet or sandblasted aluminum that's black anodized above it, so that the light that comes out of the monitor and hits the top of the hood, or whatever you have as the back of your glass, it can reflect back into the lens because it's seeing what's above the lens.
And for those of you who just want to take it all the way to its natural degree, is 2 words: Vanta black. Just put a little Vanta. It'll only cost you like $2,000 to put it up there, but man, it will be black. All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, how do you determine if you're overloading your camera sensor? Are there indications on the camera itself, or would I have to look at scopes downstream? If they are on the camera, would a Blackmagic's Pocket Cinema Camera class camera have them?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, a lot of cameras, I think, and those of you that have the Blackmagics can tell me if they have zebras built in, which is a mode you can set it on so that the viewfinder shows you, and you can set the point at which the zebras come on. When the zebras come on, it'll show you horizontal or diagonal white and black stripes in the areas that are overexposed. And you can set that to 75% or 100% if you want to go a little brighter and make sure you're not going over 100%. But usually they're set about 75%. You find that in most good monitors that are designed for video will have zebras that you can turn on.
Roscoe?
Yeah, beyond that, there's a histogram on the lower left. You can see if all your brights are going to the right. And then there is false color. That's also built into the Blackmagic, so you can learn about false color and figure out, when you're overexposing. And then if you do have scopes, if you look at scopes and there's a flat section across the top or no detail in your image, is a good indication you may be overexposed also.
Yeah, and I use in the field, I use the false color all the time. So basically it will show you in gray, it's kind of in the middle, green is good. And then you'll see, I believe, yellow and then red, in the Blackmagic one. And basically yellow is getting close and red is you are peaking, in here. And then purple is telling you where you don't have any detail in the blacks. And it's basically, it was interesting. I didn't think about this before. It's a LUT. It's a lookup table that just says, do these things and make these colors. It's just using a LUT to figure that out. But so you can actually, the reason I say that is you can make your own. If you want to make them more accurate or more detailed or highlight certain things, you can go into Resolve and build a LUT that has different kinds of false color if you really want to look at them. You won't have the same false color button that you would have. That's one of the buttons that I have on my Blackmagic camera, is I always be able to tap it and do false color to make sure that I'm not peaking anywhere, or that I know that I'm peaking if I'm going to do something like that. Now go ahead, Bill.
Exactly what Alex is saying. I actually shot all day yesterday, and I was in a situation where the camera was aimed west. We were in front of a building. The building had a portico, so it was in shadow. My speakers, and I had a series of executives and politicians, they were in the sun in front of it. And so that false color monitor, I actually kept my large monitor on false colors all day long. I used the Blackmagic Cinema 6K cameras monitor for looking at the shot and the color, but it constantly told me as the sun was moving, the colors would change, and I had an instant readout on whether I needed to expose differently, plus or minus, particularly to keep faces, because in most of those kind of circumstances, if the person looks good, everything else around them is secondary to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis, Indiana. What are the advantages or disadvantages of using an all-in-one prosumer camera, Panasonic HC-X1, for example, versus a Blackmagic 6K or Panasonic GH5 with a Sigma lens for use in a teleprompter, and it's an inside studio environment?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Autofocus, because if you don't have autofocus and it's inside a teleprompter, it's very difficult for you to get to that lens while being in front of the lens. So autofocus is a very important feature to have on a lens. And prosumer cameras will have that. Professional cameras a lot of times will not. So that's an important, and auto gain, auto aperture, any of the automatic settings, you really want to be able to have that on if you're using it as a webcam, because you won't be able to get to that lens to make the adjustment unless you have a professional camera operator on your payroll.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
And I agree 100% with Courtney. I prefer the Sony ZV-E10. Has removable lenses on it. And the best thing that has is that great Sony autofocus that Courtney was just referring to.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, so for me, it's more about the image specifically. So the X1 has a 1-inch sensor. So it's actually significantly smaller than, say, the Blackmagic 6K sensor, which is a Super 35, if I'm correct. And that sensor difference is huge. Like you just heard, the lenses are a big deal as well. The fixed aperture of that X1, I think it goes to a 2.8, and so you can get prime lenses that can go to a 1.5 or 1.0 if you get really expensive. And that makes a huge difference in your depth of field and what that's going to look like. Secondly is your color depth, right? So you might have 10-bit or 12-bit color with the Blackmagic setup, and even the GH5 has that as well. Whereas the X1, I believe, is stuck in 8-bit, so your color space is a little different with that. And then there's the dynamic range of the sensor, right? There's LUTs that can be applied to Blackmagic cameras. But the one advantage that one does have is it has SDI output.
Yeah, a couple other things. When you talk about a Sigma lens, one of the things that gets you with still cameras, still lenses that you have to remember is that you don't have back focus. So back focus allows you to basically, once you have a camera back focused, and only the video lenses will have this, you can zoom into something, focus, and then pull back out. You can't do that if you don't have back focus, and still lenses don't expect you to do that. So you don't have a back focus. So if you zoom in on a still lens and then zoom back out, you'll actually go out of focus. So you have to kind of keep that in mind if you're talking about a Sigma. Now you can get bigger lenses and put them on any camera with not any camera, but any EF mount or PL mount or those types of things. So those are things that you want to kind of think about there. I do like the fact that you have multiple lenses and you can make lots of choices about how big or how small. You can take with a Blackmagic camera or anything that has a EF lens, EF mount, for instance, you can go up to a 50 to 1000, Canon, lens, and throw it on the front of that thing. And that gives you a lot more life to the camera as far as what you can use it in. Yeah, go ahead, Noah. I
know it's a bit of a religious question of what camera you prefer, but I'm still stuck on the FS5, and I really like the feature set, the size of the sensor, super 35 mil, interchangeable lenses. You can put a servo zoom lens on it. It does a lot of great things. So the FS5 is still, I have 6 of those. It's still my go-to.
I think they look nice. I think that the color controls on the Sonys make me a little crazy. And I owned a lot of Sonys. At one point I probably had 20.
I tend to add a LUT in the Atomos Shogun, so you can kind of do it outside of the camera. But
yeah, exactly. All right, next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael again. He says, I've used the Waves PAZ audio analyzer on a master bus to analyze my audio mix, but what would be the equivalent for video? I've heard Scopebox and Nobi OmniScope mentioned.
Yeah, so the OmniScope in Scopebox are 2 of the software-based versions. There's a lot of versions of this that are both in hardware and software. I used Scopebox for years. I now mostly use OmniScope. And the reason for that is I just find the interface to be a little bit more sleek, and a little bit easier. It doesn't get into states that surprise me. Sometimes Scopebox would be a little difficult to get the input working the way I expected it to, and OmniScope doesn't seem to have that problem. OmniScope also The way you can subdivide and build your scopes is pretty useful. In fact, I can probably, if I try to type quickly, I can probably show you my setup here just to give you a sense of it. Let's see here. So this is what mine looks. Oh, I can't do that because I am sending you myself. Never mind. So anyway, I'd have to figure that out. I'm sending you my program, so that doesn't work as well as I thought it would. But anyway, it is. The big things for me are obviously RGB Parade. RGB Parade, the vector scope, which allows me to align my skin. And then, those are the two biggest ones that I probably use throughout the whole thing. So, and some false color. But Omniscope is great. You can download it, and it'll just keep on quitting on you after it expires. So you can use it for 5 minutes at a time until you decide whether you want to buy it or not. Go ahead, Bill.
I didn't know if PAS was an actual term or an acronym, so I actually looked up the Waves site and real quick. And if you're interested, it's marked down right now from $129 its normal cost to $29.95. So it might be a good time to check it out.
It's the constant Waves. I have to admit,
is that one of those things?
Waves has these rolling. I mean, it is. No one buys them at $129. I mean, unless you're a sucker. Like they're all $29, and until they're $29, you don't buy them. Then the only time that they align to being $29 for everything is on Black Friday or somewhere around there. There's some that week. There's like this or whatever. There's a week where they're all low. But I bought a bunch of them during that time, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to wait a year. But now I get emails all the time that are just like, oh, you can get this one. So they just roll through it. So you just have to wait for the Waves one. It's a goofy. I'm sure that they're making money at it, but it's like a goofy sales cycle. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yes, I do have the $3,000 platinum package that has not been adjusted for price reductions.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I would be curious too if you're going through Zoom or another distributor like that, if we can essentially maybe do an after-hour session and see, and I know we talked about this a few times, but to see what the color shift difference is, post Zoom stream or what have you.
Yeah, we should, because it's definitely, it's something we should check out because it definitely looks different in Zoom than it does like coming out of the ATEM. It looks more contrasty in Zoom than it does in QuickTime. So it doesn't seem to be the ATEM itself. That's the thing that's interesting. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Craig McFarland in Boston again. Is there a secret to using HDMI from a Mac to a Blackmagic Design ATEM Mini Pro on ports 2 through 4? I get sync issues, a flicker every 20 seconds, despite swapping cables and Macs.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, the fact that you swap the cables and Macs, again, points that the ATEMs being the culprit there. I've repeated that test myself many times with my Extreme, and I have not had that issue ever come up. Although some say, and maybe this is the secret, try port 1 because the ATEMs on startup will sometimes sync to that first before anything else.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, it's a good point. I also have not had this particular issue, but I have a couple thoughts around that. Check your display out settings and try to match them to your input 1 the best you can. I know there's 30 hertz versus 2997 and other issues there that you might have, but the closer you get it, I know the ATEM can do scaling and frame converting, but the closer you have it, I think the better that is. Second, check your ATEM firmware, see if you can update that. And then thirdly, I use a USB-C to HDMI every day on the show. To see my screen here, and that works flawlessly. So maybe try HDMI to USB-C.
Also if you go into settings, so that's in the lower left, there's a little button there, go into settings under general. In set video standard 2, make sure that that's not set to auto. Auto is where it will sync to input 1 and force that sync. You can in that set it to the frame rate exactly that you want. As opposed to letting it free roam, and you may find that it stabilizes at that point because it may be something that you're getting a frame rate that the computer doesn't like. Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas says, what are the pros and cons of a rack mount X32 versus a console with all the sliders, which is twice the price, he notes?
Good, Mitchell.
Well, it's a neatness thing. I'm always into being neat, and you can't run all of those wires all over your desk without using a rack. If you put it in a rack, you can be very tidy. about all the gazintas and gazaltas, and they just run a one wire fader control to your desktop, and now you've got a clean desktop. It's just a personal preference. It'll work the same. It just works better for me cleanliness wise.
Yeah, go, John.
I have this solution, Paul. Just buy both, and then you'll know.
One for each mic. I think that I've had a lot of these. I probably had 10 or 15 of each at one time. And they're good for different things. It's nice having a console that does everything all at one time with the sliders and everything else. So there's an advantage, especially the larger consoles. If you need the X32s come in a lot of different form factors. So one form factor that works really well is the really large one that has lots of sliders to work with if you're doing something more complex. And there's also a producer version that slides in and out of a 19-inch rack, which is really nice because you put it into the audio rack and you just slide it out. And now you can do everything there and slide it back in, and that can be very tidy if you're on the road. We mostly get the racks at this point, and the reason that I get the racks is because I'd rather just put an X-Touch somewhere, as Mitchell said, with an Ethernet connection to it, and it'll do most of what we need to do. If we're doing something more complex than what we can do with an X32 and an X-Touch, we move to a QL1. So it's that for the complexity of how we use the product. I find that the X32 rack works well, and to exactly what Mitchell was talking about, is that we love having it in a rack with everything pre-wired, and so that I'm not running a whole bunch of cables to a desk. It really slows down your load in. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, my primary right now is a QU16, and I'm really considering buying a bunch of X32 racks to put in different carts, and then having X-Touches as the control surfaces for that. We'll see if that shapes out. We'll see.
It works really well. Next question is, go ahead.
Oh, from John
Almost did a Sunday. Yeah, exactly.
We've all done that. John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania says, are Dante I/O racks vendor specific? For example, would you use a Panasonic TO1608 with an Allen Heath Dante mixer?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, once you have it into Dante, it's going to work just like Dante on every one of those devices. Dante is great for routing and setting inputs to outputs and all of that, and it's going to be the same regardless, as long as it's Dante.
Yeah, I've not used the Panasonic, but we've definitely used Rios with Behringers, and even take out the stage box in our stage right now is an X32 that just goes back to a QL1. So they should, as Mitchell said, they should all interop very well. Next question.
All right, Cochran in Seattle in the USA says, what would you put in a remote kit to send to a guest that is a technophobe?
We're building a lot of kits of different sizes right now. And I think that one of the most basic thing that we're sending out is the MV7. We just sent one out, and the MV7 works really well. Send it out with a stand, USB cable, and it's done. And that doesn't fix the video problems. And one of the big things we're still struggling with is the height of the stand. So even the low stands are pretty high on a desk. So we're working on buying a couple new ones to figure that out. But it solves so many audio problems without them having to figure anything out. And then the next thing that we still do is use the Brios. Although the color in the Brios has gotten to a point where when we wrestle with it, I kind of feel like we've tried to do manual control over them, and we found that sometimes we're better off just leaving it on auto color than trying to mess with it. It seems like he puts it into a state now that doesn't seem to work as well as we'd like it to. So those are the things that we're kind of struggling with, I know, on our end. And then, we use NAND lights, either the 6Cs or the little Luma pads are the things that we tend to send out for folks on the other end. Go ahead, Noah.
I'm wondering if the One Touch Studio is mobile or not, if he sends that out, but that's a product that Guy offers in the DVD store. So you might want to check that out and see that. For me, I still do a crew touch point of some sort. I tend not to send a kit that is self-assembled. So if I can, I'll send a crew member. Obviously, that's not always the case, but I tend to still do that right now. But there's definitely a business opportunity for those home kits, and there's a lot of businesses that have started up that send and receive those kits.
Yeah, and we're as we move forward, I'm trying to get ready to do more where the second hours we supply, as office hours, we just supply here's some mics and everything else so that we can make sure that everybody looks and sounds relatively good and keeps up with us on the second hours. So we're really looking deeply into that process. Go ahead, Sky.
Just wanted to give the example of the MV7 microphone. And this is what Mickey recommended, and then also was able to get from Guy Cochran, as well as the Logitech Brio 4K, which is attached to the top of a laptop. Not the best situation. I'd prefer to have it mounted separately, but to get, again, to Alex's comment, I just thought I'd be the Vanna White and show the example.
Yeah. And I think that it definitely works well, and I think that
I do need the additional lights, though. I have one ring light up here, which is not optimum.
Well, and we would, again, if for primary video, we would definitely send more gear. I mean, our biggest kits have a teleprompter and a 6K and ATEM and a mix pre, and we have them built so that you can set them up yourself, but it's an art project. So anyway, we don't do it as much anymore now. Post COVID, we usually send someone out to fix it, put it up for you. But they're great kits, but they're $15,000 kits, and so those are we're also looking for things that we don't feel bad about sending out relatively often. The one thing that we are still thinking about, because it's still COVID, and even I think COVID has just made us more sensitive to germs in general, is how do we clean them when we get them back? And so that's part of it, and part of that is just low circulation and not sending it right out again. And another part is UV, and because the problem with those the MV7s is that windscreen. So we're looking at like replacement windscreens that we can use to make that work, because that windscreen. What does it sound like when you take the windscreen off? I've never done that.
I've never done it either. This is what it sounds like with it off, and this is
I can hear your plosives immediately.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
There. Yeah.
I'm very plosive. But here it is with it on. This is what it sounds like with it on. Yeah. So there's the difference.
Yeah. Next question.
For playing.
Yeah. Chris Widener's up next from Lafayette, Indiana. He says, working on a mapping project for a proposed subdivision. Has anyone tried out the Swan K1 Pro, either on the regular or mapping variant? Interesting looking beast there.
I just don't know what your budget's like. I don't know if I would use a fixed wing for a mapping project. So
it's kind of a weird little VTOL thing, though, because in the third picture on their site, it's in an entirely different orientation, like a helicopter or a little.
Yeah,
it's weird.
So here's the thing with mapping is that stability of the platform is really, really important, and so you need to have a very specific camera system to make that work. One of the things you may want to look at hidden, this depends on your budget, and you may decide you just hire someone to do this rather than doing it. But if you have a license and you are looking at those, I believe it's the Zenmuse P1. So this is a more specialized lens and camera system that DJI makes. It's not part of their general cameras that you would see, and it's the P1. And this is a 45 megapixel. Off the top of my head, I think it's a 45 megapixel full frame sensor with a global shutter. It doesn't do video. It's specifically designed to do photogrammetry. And you have to use a bigger DJI as well. So and the lens and the camera itself is like $7,000 or $8,000 or something like that. So if you're really getting serious about it, folks who are doing, a lot of people are using DJIs for this type of thing. And and if you're mapping it, one of the things that you might want to also look at is targets. So if you're getting really serious about the mapping, I just don't know where you're at in the mapping process. But what you need is you need a fixed point in space that is where it is in the world. So you need and typically you can use a Trimble system for that. And what it'll do is it'll look at known points in GPS, 3 or 4 of them. It'll triangulate that down to literally millimeters. And so now within millimeters or low centimeters, it will know where it is in the world. And from there, you then start to survey out from that perspective. And then you'll understand where key points are through the surveying system. And we've used these Trimble SX10s are really good because they're a scanner as well as a survey device. And so if you use that, you can build a framework to work with. And then inside of that framework, you can survey out targets. These are big targets they're black and white squares, every other, like 4, like little 4 squares or whatever. And you lay those down and survey them. Now, when you run photogrammetry when you you can use those squares because they're known points to correct for your scale and position and so on and so forth, to lock your photogrammetry in from the sky. Anyway, sorry, that's probably too long of an answer. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. He says, now that Arby's will soon be serving hamburgers, is it possible that Blackmagic Designs may be making their own lenses?
You're lucky we asked this one at kind of -3 and we still asked it. That's how much we care about our questions there. Go ahead, Mitchell.
This is a very interesting question, Mitchell, and thanks for asking it. I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that it would be surprising that Arby's would serve hamburgers, equally as it would be surprising that Blackmagic would make its own lenses. And then the next question is: the Arby's hamburger good, or is the Blackmagic design lens good? Okay, now that I've framed that.
I think that we talked about in the pre-show that given the success of the quality of the hamburgers that Arby's making, or the reports of the quality, we don't want Blackmagic to make any lenses. Anyway, go ahead, Noah.
If I was paying attention a little bit more, I would definitely would have upvoted this question. For me, I don't know if they will, but it would be a wonderful idea. I mean, really, if Blackmagic, there's 3 things Blackmagic could put out that would totally change everything I'm doing. The first would be some sort of MFT servo zoom lens, right, for their Studio Series cameras. It's just a joke. I think all of us know that the lens offerings for the studio cameras are just negligent, so it's not great. The second would be some sort of EF lens that's compatible or matches the Sony lens, which is why I'm still on Sony, but it's the 28 to 135 or the 18 to 110, and the price on those are $2,500 or $3,500. So if Blackmagic or really another lens provider puts something out like that, that would be amazing. And then the third product I'll mention is a PTZ from Blackmagic. So we'll see.
Oh yeah, Sky.
PTZ. I'm just wondering if that hamburger has a bayonet mount or a screw mount. But the thing I've seen major corporations like this do is they would go acquire somebody that knows how to do it right, and then they would modify it and adapt it into their, rather than starting from scratch. But maybe they could, because and that's kind of, isn't that Blackmagic's history, is they go and acquire somebody.
There's not many lens manufacturers to acquire at this point, so they're either doing well or not around, and so I think that would be harder. You got to get them when they're on fire but not completely burnt out. That's Blackmagic's model is house is on fire but we could still put it out, and it's got good bones.
Zeiss is doing okay. Zeiss is not in trouble.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So we talked about this before the show, and here's my thought on it. It has to do with capability and infrastructure. And I made the point in the pre-show discussion that where Arby's has an issue with this is that they don't have grills in their restaurants as it stands. And that's how traditionally most of the hamburger shops make hamburgers, at least in volume. So not having that piece, they've had to look at a different process. And we discussed, I had read something where they're doing a kind of a sous vide in a central kitchen, bringing it in and then microwaving it right before service. And whether you like that or not, whether you go and try it and it's great or not, it shows you that infrastructure, particularly manufacturing infrastructure with something as precise as lenses, is a critical factor in doing it well. So I think to the other points that were made before here, unless they buy an existing system to build a factory just to make lenses with all the optics science that goes into that, would be a very heavy lift. They have the resources, and God knows they've got a lot of brain power at Blackmagic, but whether they can build that infrastructure out in a reasonable way, bring it to market, and make it a profitable arm so it doesn't just drag the company into a mess rather than outsourcing the lenses, is the question I think they're going to have to answer. And so I wouldn't hold my breath for Blackmagic lenses. That's a pretty specific science.
And anyone from Arby's is listening. I have done some research in the area of sous vide hamburgers, and if you sous vide it to 125 degrees over an hour and a half, and then put it into something that'll raise it at the 900 degree environment, it's an excellent burger. But if your fat content is over 15%, it'll catch fire. Just in case you're wondering. All right. All right, next question.
There you go. Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, says the sensor on the new DJI Mini Pro 1 by 1/3 inch CMOS has effective pixels. It's a 48 megapixel video, 4K 60, versus the DJI Mini 2, which is a half 1 by 2/3 inch CMOS, effective pixels 12 megapixels at 4K 30. How would you quantify the difference for a grant?
I go with Roscoe.
Well, grant writing is a talent, and you just have to pick those features that differentiate it. Obviously, this one would be the pixel, the 48 megapixels. I don't know if this is going up to the 3-bid low, which is what happens in the state of California. You have to get 3 bidders, and the low bidder gets the thing, which means sometimes you end up with things that meet your specification but aren't what you wanted. So, yeah, that's why I say grant writing is a talent.
Yeah, and I don't know whether you're on the which side of the grant you're on. If you're on the tail end of the 3-bid, you're going to have to do what you do. If you're on the writing end of the grant, the way that grants are written, if you want a certain company to do it, you write it in a way that was so specific that it looks general, but no one else could produce it except for the company that you want to be able to produce it, and so no one else can meet the requirements. Like that's how we've gotten through triple bids for a long time, or I have in the past anyway. Not necessarily what I know, but Pixelcore, we were triple bidded all the time, but our partner there would just constantly give us very specific needs that only we could produce. Because triple bidding is stupid, like it's dumb. It's written by people who are idiots, and it should not be respected in any way, shape, or form. Anyway, I think that you're going to find that the biggest thing that's going to make a difference in what you're doing is the larger sensor. Larger sensor means you're going to have better low light. You're going to have better, higher quality images. So it will be distinctly better than the Mini 2. Go ahead, Bill.
Study the architects industry, because they do this all the time in bid specifications. It has to do this and this and this, and anybody reading it who knows what they're doing goes, oh, that's the Partco X7. That's the only one that meets that. That's what they wanted, and that's why they wrote all that language just to specify that part.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, it's just it's up there with like open offices as like dumb people doing dumb things. Anyway, next question.
John Barker out of Malmar, Sweden, our friend, says, any tips on a 5-pin to headphones adapter for the ATEM Constellation HD, or should I dust off the soldering iron?
Go ahead, Noah.
Well, if you sell it on your website, John, I'll buy one.
Go ahead, Courtney. I can't hear you, Courtney.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, my computer is just recovering from a hard crash, and I clicked the button, and the hourglass.
There it is. It's coming up. We can hear it.
I can hear you. Can hear me now.
So what was the
dust off the soldering iron? Or one thing you might want to do if you're in Germany, though, True Audio, or you can find a location sound rental house near you, might be able to construct one for you if you're not very good at soldering. If you give them the pinouts, they should be able to construct a adapter for you, 1/4 inch to 5-pin XLR. I don't think anyone makes one off the shelf per se. So you're probably not going to find one. You're going to have to make one.
Yeah, they make adapters from 5-pin to 4-pin and 4-pin to 5-pin. I haven't seen any commercial adapters that do. Anytime we've had to go from a 4 or 5-pin to a regular headset, we've always ended up with a building them ourselves. Or there's a guy out of Texas, and I just can't think of his name right now. But there is there's a person out of Texas that does all the wiring for the Clearcom stuff, and they will build the RJ45 to breakouts and the this to that and this to that. And I was trying to find it. I can't remember. I haven't used it for years, but there's a guy down there that will just build any cable. He builds these for Clearcom, but he also just any cable that you need, you ping him and he'll, it's like $80 and you'll get a cable back like that does whatever you want it to do. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, has anyone looked into the Insta360 Sphere for the Mavic Air 2 or 2S? And would the 360 video be that useful for reframing, or is the field of view too distracting?
I have not used the Insta360 Sphere for this. I have used other ones. The big thing you have to be careful of with 360 is getting you'll have a temptation to move it down away from the drone, because otherwise half of your image is going to be the drone. And so as you move it away, the drone gets a lot smaller. But if you move it too far, you've moved the center of balance of the drone too far away. And I lost a Phantom that way. Anyway, they start rocking back and forth, and then they start spinning, and then there's no more drone. Go ahead, Bill.
I'd be a little leery, because I know that even in shooting with DSLRs, depending on the lens you're using on the camera, there are a lot of algorithms in Photoshop and other places that remap the spherical aberration of the lens into a flat two-dimensional plane. And if you don't apply that, everything is a little bit wonky. So 360 is so wraparound that when they try to flatten a 360, it's kind of like the map projections. Things don't map exactly. And so I would be hesitant about using a 360 camera if your goal is a flat plane.
Did Insta360 release something today? I don't know if there's something new today or not. Anyway, we'll come back to that. Next question.
Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York has the next.
Oh, yes. Hold on. So it's
okay.
Yeah, it just got released today. So anyway, is this the 25th? Yeah. I knew I had the sense that something was coming. So what he's asking about specifically is the sphere, this new sphere, which I'm not as accustomed to, is actually built for the drone. So this is not what I was expecting, which is, this is it's really cool. So this fixes the exact problem that I was talking about, which is that it puts the 180 lenses on either. You can attach it to the top and the bottom of your drone. So you can actually put it on the top and the bottom of the drone, and then it's capturing the 360 above and 360 below, and then it'll stitch it back together. So I'm going to take back what I said. This is the solve for what I was just talking about. Is you see the drone and it's half the drone. This is a thing that fits onto the Mavic Air 2 and 2S. This is the new Insta360 Sphere, and it looks super cool. And so I will take back what I said and mention that my wallet is smoldering a little bit. All right, next question.
Okay, Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York. I told a couple of interior designers about LiDAR when I saw that they had iPhones. What are the best apps to get them started? I recall an episode with a film app.
There is for interior, the probably Polycam is the one that we've used the most, and there's another one that I'm testing that I haven't had enough testing to have an opinion, is called Sitescape. So I think those are the two leaders, though. Sitescape and Polycam are probably the two to play with. Polycam's like $8 a month, so you really want to know that you're going to use it. But it works really well. The model that comes out of it is not pretty. It's just that it's accurate and you can use it for a reference. So it's a relatively slick way to kind of get measurements really, really fast to do that. So that if I was going to do it with my phone, it'd be either Polycam or Sitescape. Next question.
The next one comes from Noah Sargent, Fullerton, California, and he asks, could we do a YouTube channel, Ruthless Review, in the future for volunteers?
Bill?
So one of the things about the Ruthless Reviews that we do here, and for those of you who haven't watched the show a lot, we've occasionally in the past done these days where we literally look at the panelists and go as deep as we can on things that could be improved, things that might not be as smooth as you like, whatever's distracting about an image. But the thing that I really love about it is they're real time. So you give the person a chance to actually make changes in real time. I'm not sure if I would be all that comfortable in somebody capturing a Ruthless Review that had been done on my system back in the third month of office hours, because it was horrible compared to what I'm managing to do now. And it kind of makes that something that's part of history going forward, even as we change. But I'm sure people would be interested in it.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, as a reminder, we go full OCD here.
Yeah,
those reviews, and it might be good to populate that channel with people with that affliction, just to get down to the real nitty gritty.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be interesting to have people submit a video of them. We could tell them, say this thing into your camera, so everyone says the same thing. In fact, we'll make them recite Shakespeare, and that'd be a lot of fun. But just have them say something so that we get a sense of their audio and their video. I think it wouldn't necessarily be. I think it'd be a good idea. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, this stems off of the conversation we had on YouTube marketing a few days ago, but just the thought of the intricacies of setting up a channel and maybe even some SEOs and tags and the stuff that is kind of outside of what our normal show would be, but specific on YouTube and, talking about what's working on that channel, what's not working. The long story short, I have a couple smaller channels, and I would love some critical feedback. I always like feedback. I need to like spend a little bit more time on them, and I've been encouraged by some people lately to come back to that. So hopefully I will.
Yeah, let's think about that. I mean, I think that review my channel could be really interesting, and just like what your channel looks like and what we're left with, and so on and so forth. I think could be really cool. Yeah, so let's keep that in mind. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. Waves recently introduced Cloud MX, and he's got a link there, which is a cloud-based version of their Emotion LV1 mixer. What would you think of a Waves on as a second hour?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea. At least they could do is tell us when their $29 specials are happening. I know Gilad Karen very well over there. He's the CEO, so I could help arrange it if you
I'd be happy to have Waves over. And we have a bunch of their plugins, and I think a lot of us use them. I think it'd be a fun guest. So yeah, go ahead and ask them. Next question.
Noah Sargent, Fullerton, California, right back to us. If you started over in life, your age reset to 20, and you kept your memories and experiences, would you pursue what you do now, or would you do something else?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, no, when you get to be my age, you kind of start over in life anyway, because you can only remember the older stuff. You can't remember the new stuff that happened. But
and you relive it over and over and over again in your mind. In
your mind, you just relive all those great old experiences. And that's kind of what I would do, because I am fortunate enough to work at something I love doing, and over the many years, my interests have changed, and my work has changed along with those interests. And so I just followed my glee or my bliss, as is the popular saying. So yeah, I as a documentarian and sound engineer on documentaries, I got to meet a lot of famous people one-on-one and have great experiences with them and travel all over the world. So I don't think I'd trade that.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I would be hopelessly gridlocked, knowing both things at the same time. I agree with Courtney. I think it's cool. I want to be Courtney, as a matter of fact. I'll admit it right now. But to go from radio to video production and post, that's a stretch.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm not sure if I'd like it. And the reason I say that is looking back at it, the times that things have gone wrong, the times that I've made mistakes are the things that stretched me and energized me to fix things. If I started out knowing all the things I know now, yeah, there's a part that maybe I could go farther and do better at this and that. And I would certainly avoid some of the mistakes that have been uncomfortable. But that is what makes life, for me, worth getting up every day. And if I knew it all ahead of time and could avoid so many of the traps, I don't know whether there would be enough other traps. Maybe there would be, but I'm leery of it.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
I work with 20-year-olds, and so it's just interesting to see their sense of just adventure. Everything's an adventure, and they just want to go check things out. And I worry that with your knowledge, you wouldn't take that risk. You wouldn't drive that car at that speed. And not that that's a good analogy, but just the things that they're willing to do at that age. And I think sometimes having all this wisdom, you're like, oh, that could be dangerous, or don't throw that beanbag. Anyways, don't throw that beanbag at your sister. You might hit her in the face and actually cause surgery.
All right, go ahead, John.
Warren Buffett says, find a business that makes money while you're sleeping. That's the kind of business that you want.
Yeah, I could never pull off what I've done in the last 30 years or so. 30 some years. I could never do it again, because I did a lot of things because I had I think I did a lot of things because I didn't know how hard they'd be, and I also didn't have a sense of life work balance. And so I could never do it again. I would never, to be honest with you, want to do it again. I'm very happy with where I'm at now. But I wouldn't want to go through that, what I did for 30 years to get there. And so I think I like where I'm at. Like I'm good. Like I don't need to do it again. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I feel bad asking this question and not responding with all the great responses there. But yeah, for me, I think having that leverage of that experience and that knowledge is huge. But the reality is, like, if you have good mentors and people that you pay attention to, like, you can leverage and utilize their experience to help take you further, farther, faster, for sure. I think, yeah, a little bit of what Alex is saying is like, there's that naivety to like some of the challenges and some of the things you face that you are immune to, like when you're early on in your career and you just plow through stuff. Whereas like the older I get, the less I feel like I'm able to be agile in that sense. But I'm also realizing, like, coming back to what we're doing with NAMM and what we're going to be talking about later today, it reminds me so much of like my college years where we just corralled together for a purpose and we didn't care about finances, and like we just made stuff happen.
Right.
And so that's exciting to me to have that breath back in me, so to speak.
I mean, it's one of the reasons I like doing these projects, like the projects that we've done on the stage, the projects that we do, the NAMM, when I was doing more coverage myself of these locations, all of those things I thought were just a lot of fun, to do. And they were exciting to work on. So I do think that, I think that's definitely a plus, and that I have learned the most usually when I'm doing something with no budget. That's because then I take on risks that I won't take when I'm getting paid. I'm very risk adverse. I either charge a lot of money or I do very little, because I'm always afraid of what the ramifications will be when there's not a lot of money involved. Then I get very adventurous, and so I definitely enjoy those. Next question.
Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California, who's just speaking, says YouTube marketing is king today, but what does the next platform look like?
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm not sure. Okay, so here's all I want to say. Yes, it is a huge deal, but it is also a huge deal in terms of a certain widespread of products and services and things that fit it. I mean, you don't see dentists doing YouTube marketing. You don't see oil companies doing YouTube marketing. There's a lot of big commerce out in the world that doesn't fit into that. It's real easy to get caught up in thinking, no matter what my business is, if I just put some YouTube ads together, it's going to do things for me. Well, that may be just as inefficient as any other mismatch between what the platform can bring to you and what you need to have brought to you to enhance your business results or whatever. So you just have to pay attention to it. It's a superb service, and it allows new things that were never allowed before in terms of effective marketing, but it's not a panacea for everything. That's all I'm saying.
I will say that when you say you don't see these big companies doing YouTube marketing, it would be more accurate to say you don't notice them doing YouTube marketing.
Okay, fair enough.
Someone who has done a lot of work for them. so it's not necessarily oil companies, but for a lot of big brands with no, their brand or their thing may be a glancing shot, like literally there's a whole YouTube thing that'll look like just someone did a UGC, and there's a cereal on the table, and just in the background, that's the brand. like that's that. There's nothing like, and you barely see it go by. It's not even focused on or ever or whatever. But that's the brand. so they it's pretty effective. Go ahead, John.
I want to see a decentralized social network like Bitcoin, like Kazaa or Napster.
Yeah.
That utilizes the peer-to-peer bandwidth and storage, and then a combination of like LucidLink. How LucidLink does their caching is very clever, but that way there's no centralized server network to go down. There's no data centers. There's just a giant collective.
Yeah. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Community based. It's YouTube tries to find an audience, but if you have people that you associate with, we are an audience to each other. I learn all kinds of things from this group.
Yeah. Mitchell.
Quality. I think people forget that just because you get on YouTube doesn't mean that you have a quality product that gets your message across. I think we're going to see a lot of transition over to YouTube type delivery, streaming delivery, and the quality of the production has to be done better. And people don't tend to excuse the fact, he's doing a YouTube from his garage for his new multi-billion-dollar product. So you have to ramp and scale the content and the message along with the quality of the distribution method.
Good, Courtney.
It's a completely different paradigm for advertising, whereas, normal commercial advertising on television and radio has been you pay a certain amount of dollars for a certain exposure to a certain demographic audience. And it's dollars versus a discoverability or exposure. On YouTube, you kind of got to work the search engine, and you can either pay for keywords through YouTube's advertising department, or you can kind of try and build a viral video to go viral and have discoverability and amplification through just the public repeating it. So it would be called word of mouth advertising in the old world, but now it's kind of YouTube passing it along and retweets and things like that amplify through social media. So it's kind of a different paradigm, not necessarily based on dollar investment for return.
Yeah, I think the future lies somewhere in what I would call intentional communities. What we have here is an intentional community. We weren't born into it, didn't move into it, or physically, where we have neighbors that we may or may not like. It is, we intentionally decide that we interact with each other online, from anywhere in the world. And so I think that there's an opportunity to build a lot more like what we see here. I think that, and those become pockets. I think there's some dangers in that, but that's something we have to there's dangers in everything, but I think there's going to be a growing ability for people to online and then maybe eventually in person only interact with the folks that they feel like interacting with, like just not having to really work out the other stuff because they can filter out the rest of the population. And I think that's got its own issues that will arise, but I think that intentional communities are probably what's coming next. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, how can you build audience energy and cohesion in a virtual environment without the moderation risks of text-based chat?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I'll take a stab at this one. I think having a moderator that's really good to make sure that things flow in the right direction, keep the energy level up, and keep the audience engaged. There's no secret to why good talk shows on TV always have somebody warming the crowd up, and even a game show does the same thing. It gets everybody's expectations up. They know what the rules are of play, and that person can step in if there's a need.
Yeah, and this gets back to almost to the last question, which is that being able to be intentional about who's involved and not have it just be random allows you to not have to worry about as much moderation. Here we create hills that are hard to get through to do that, and then we can. So I think that's but you can, in other things that I've worked on, it's member only, and if you are a bad member, you're not a member much longer. And then the conversations are really great because you just don't have any, you don't have to deal with folks, throwing Molotov cocktails into the conversation. Go ahead, Josh.
I think there has to be some accountability for people when they do participate, and you have to have openings in your venue that are intended to allow the input. If you just bulldoze over, or if they get the impression that their being there or not being there doesn't have any effect in the trajectory of the event, then they won't feel engaged.
And the thing to be careful of is that, dissent is actually a great thing that creates great conversation. So it's really easy to take this one too far, where you clean it so far that it becomes sterile. So you have to, kind of figure out where that happy mix is of folks that don't necessarily all agree on the same thing, but can be civil and part of that conversation. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael again, and this time he says, I've enjoyed using the app Melodics, and he's got the link there, to learn keyboard playing skills, and I hope to use it for drums as well. What critical concepts would be better taught by a live teacher than the app?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Motivation. They answer the question, why am I doing what I'm doing, which hopefully motivates you. And also I think many great teachers transfer passion. They have a passion for something and they get excited about it and they transfer that to you. I'm not sure how that could be done with an app.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things with having a teacher is the basically the feedback. The problem is that the computer can kind of tell you, oh, your notes are right or not, but a true human can tell you your form, how you're approaching things, how you're, doing it from a much deeper perspective than the computer can. And you have to remember that as you start to practice and do all the things that you're doing, practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And so if you aren't practicing just right, you're actually making it harder to grow. You will cap yourself off. And that's why having a great human teacher, like my daughter learns a lot on the piano by just learning stuff from YouTube, but she still goes to a teacher because that teacher is going to pick at things that she's doing with her wrists and how she's approaching those things. And it's very important, especially if you practice a lot, to have somebody picking at your form and your approach to it, or you'll build permanent things that you'll have to unlearn. I think I've said this before. When I was 16 years old, I had to rebuild my throwing arm. I had been doing that since I was 5, and basically a year of not being able to throw. Like when I was, in baseball, because my form was so bad that I had to, rebuild the entire mechanism, and that was very painful. Actually painful, like to do it. And so you want to not burn things in that when you're starting, this is the time to get feedback. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Alex said what I was going to say. Observation of technique is something a teacher, if they're in the same room with you, are observing how you're doing, or even listening to what you're doing. If you're doing a rim shot and you're hitting a little too much of the rim and not enough of the top of the drum, they can see that and critique it, and hear it and critique it. Whereas a computer may not be able to correctly judge your technique and correct your technique, especially for music playing. And a lot of music playing is technique, keyboard technique, and
Right.
And hand technique with drums and embouchure and things like that that can't really be evaluated with AI by a computer.
And if you watch sports at all, and you go back and watch the 70s, and then watch now, and the difference is human like critique, of those, aided by video, the level of precision that athletes have today is 100 times what they did only 30 years ago. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael. Oh, I'm sorry, not Douglas Carmichael. Noah Sargent, Fullerton, California. He says, Parkinson's law is an old adage that work expands to fill the time allotted for its completion. Have you found that true?
We'll go pretty quick through this, Mitchell.
Yes, everything is never finished. It's just abandoned at some point.
Bill.
Yes, although I will say, go back and watch the Bob Fosse biopic, all that jazz. There's a great scene in there where he's working on two huge projects at one time, and one of his people, the film editor part of it, they're beating on him to get it done, get it done, get it done. And then the producer comes in and watches and said, oh my God, it's better. He made it better. So it tells you that even if you're trying to artificially limit it, you have to be careful, because there may be more work that really needs to be done to get to the goal you want. And so you got to balance those.
Good, Courtney.
And this goes alongside Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law of selective gravitation, that a dropped tool will always fall where it'll do the most harm.
Yeah, the only thing, the last thing I'll just say is that just because it expands to the allotted time doesn't mean it doesn't get better with more time. Like if you have more time, time is when we talk to clients all the time, I'm like, the resource is time. Like the resource that we're worried about is time, because especially with live events, having time before the event is everything. Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle. How did Bo's NFT session go?
Good, Sky.
I learned a lot. It's a language that I'm wanting to participate in, because I think it is a part of our future. And to Noah's lovely questions about what does the future look like, because he's got more of it than I do, I'm very interested in this conversation, and I learned a ton. But I'll let Alex explain the details.
Bo just walked us through the process of making an NFT and minting an NFT, and even I even have some Bo NFTs in my wallet now, and so I am excited about minting my own NFT in the coming weeks. So we'll let you know. I think the next one we'll try to do a lab where we all build something and turn it into an NFT, so that we all know how to do it. I think I found it to be fascinating, and regardless of how you feel about it, it's a really interesting technology, and I think very valid technology. And it's really cool that Bo was able to show us a little bit of it. So I'm looking forward to
Alex,
the next session.
You talked about, your example was, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, there was an artist that did a thing that you thought, oh, look at that garage sale. And you could have got them for what, $10 or $100 or something. And now they're worth
I think
lots.
I was talking about an artist that was doing selling stuff for $500 to $1,000 that ended up being worth tens of millions. We'll leave that out of this conversation.
Okay.
But art is like this. Go ahead, Noah.
I think this is for the next question, actually.
Oh, okay. Next, last question for the first hour.
Noah Sargent, Fullerton, California. As we make eye contact, oxytocin is released, and our pupils tend to copy our partners. This is a phenomenon known as pupil mimicry and impacts trust levels. When a person's pupils dilate, the other person tends to trust them more. True for Zoom, he wonders.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I heard this on a podcast this morning. I thought it was super interesting. And obviously, it's just basically the science behind some eye contact. And I was just curious if we thought, and I do think it translates to Zoom, through teleprompters and us talking like this. I think it's a strong selling point for when we work with clients.
This was Errol Morris's primary argument. related to the Interrotron, which was that you will mimic the other person's face, and you have a different. What we've noticed is more of when people are looking through an Interrotron, their eyes converge differently, and it's super subtle, but it feels more active when they're looking at just a camera. They get this kind of blank stare. And if you look at any CNN, this is a red pill conversation, by the way. Now I'm going to tell you, look at every CNN or Fox News or whatever you're watching, and notice how everyone just looks like have a blank stare on their face. It's because they don't see anybody. And they would look completely different to you if they put a teleprompter in. And the reason they don't put a teleprompter in is because they're cheap. Like they don't want to pay for the return signal back to the insert studio. And so them only seeing a camera and looking at the camera and only listening creates a facial thing that is flat and bland. That it would be that is different when they're looking at a person. Now in the past, we had them look at a person off the camera so they could have that interaction. And the problem with that, of course, is that no one likes that anymore. I mean, like we have clients that just won't. They're like, none of our clients want to see anybody because of Zoom, because of the last 2 years. It has become unfashionable to look off camera. Like we have a lot of clients that are like, why are they looking to the side? Like it's a really interesting. That whole genre is dying because people are used to looking straight in now. Go ahead, Sky.
Shakespeare, eyes are the windows to the human soul. And so we are, as humans, looking to be with other humans. And this is the connection point. Now, staring in other cultures is a constant thing. And it's a little unnerving to an American to go into Scandinavia and all they do is just look straight at you the entire time. So culturally, you'll find that different in different cultures.
I took a weekend course one time where you sit across from a person, one of the many exercises, you sit across from a person and you stare at them in the eye to eye for 10 minutes. And it seems like an eternity. And you never relate to that person the same again, like ever. Like, it's an amazing thing that happens every single time. I'm going to go to Courtney.
Yeah, I've noticed since COVID, though, most of the news channels, the cable news channels, and the network news channels, Zoom has become an acceptable input for those. So what used to be, transport the people to an insert studio that has a teleprompter and everything comes down to, do they have a laptop? Are they in a hotel room somewhere? Let's get them on. And the immediacy of the competition for breaking news has put the technical, aspects aside from the importance of the news that they're delivering. So we've gotten used to seeing people looking down at the screen on their laptop or up, depending upon where their webcam is or where they have if they're good enough to have a DSLR or something over the top of their screen, not looking directly into the lens. So
and the worst,
more accepted.
The worst part is that the broadcasters they don't even tell them how to make it better. Like when, I can't tell you how many times people have come out of a conversation with Shannon going, I'm on ABC and all these things and CNN and everything else over and over again. No one told me any of these tips. Like, we didn't even send them a kit. We just told them what they needed and they just went out and bought it. I mean, they have the money. I mean, these are experts that are getting paid to do this thing. They have the money to do the thing, and they spent $600 or $1,000, and now they look better. And who's going to get called again to be an expert? The person who looks good and sounds good that they don't have to pay as much for. And so it's an easy target for them to do. And I know we're running a little over. We'll finish this question and do one more real quick one with Douglas, and then we'll move on. Go ahead, Noah.
I'm just so excited we could have these conversations because I feel like nobody else cares but us, and doesn't really get it, but us. And so when I heard this morning, I was super giddy. And then, when I thought of it, and I'm so happy to hear people's responses and to expand on that. So,
yeah, as Noah knows, I spend a lot of time dealing with eye contact. Like I'm obsessed with it. I just feel like it is on many of the stuff that we do, trying to figure out, and this is what I've done for the last 10 years, is try to figure out how to improve that connection between people. And we started it with doing interviews for Salesforce, where we were doing the Interrotron. I'd never even heard of what an Interrotron was. There was a creative director at Salesforce that really liked it. And so we started learning it. And once we got hooked on it, we were like, never wanted to do anything else. It just, and how do we get closer and closer to that experience all the time? Last question for the first hour.
Douglas Carmichael wrote it, and he says, LG Smart TVs offer a Twitch app. When you're feeding audio to Twitch, what's the most effective way to make sure it is listenable? Currently, I use Wave's playlist rider to level to negative 24 LUFS, and then an L3 limiter that starts at about negative 12 dB.
All I'll say is I don't plug my TVs into the internet. I know that doesn't answer your question, but it's all like the LG, like you should not plug your TV into the internet, just in case you're wondering. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and all the built-in TV apps and the smart TVs are sluggish and slow and not worth that. Get you a Fire TV stick or a Roku stick or something with its own processor that's not having to deal with the television controls itself, and you'll be a lot happier with the audio quality and the video quality of your streaming.
And while more expensive, the Apple TV has the highest performance chips. so especially when you get into 4K, it will look better. Now we're jumping our subject to our second hour, and we're getting ready for NAMM and CineGear. And so we're going to throw it to Noah to give us a little update of where things are.
Yeah, we've been making lots of progress. It's been fun to be a part of these meetings, and honestly a little wearing too, because I've been in a lot of these meetings and a lot of good conversations, a lot of decisions to be made. So far we've done 4 meetings, and we have 3 left to go before we run out of time specifically for NAMM, and then we have 2 more for CineGear coming the week later. But yeah, lots of things have been decided on. We do have a deadline today for anybody new who wants to be a part of NAMM. Right, we need to have a cutoff because there's training and stuff we need to do to get you into our system. So if you have any interest in that, today's the day. If you don't reach out to us today, if you hit us up tomorrow, we're going to say thank you, but we're going to put you on the next project, But yeah, we're still figuring out some things. There's some holes in our system that we're going to address, and we're talking about that and communicating about that. So if you have any questions, hopefully we can answer those this morning. But what I found beneficial to this whole thing is the stress testing, and not just from like a CineGear or a NAMM perspective, but also from like an office hours or even a 2.0 perspective. Like there's certain things that we've made work for now, and I say we, meaning the team that has been doing this for 2+ years and has been awesome at it. But when we are integrating these shows and the number of volunteers on the back end is expanding like crazy, that whole stress test just emphasizes that we're going to keep iterating and developing the system. And I can't speak to the exact things that are being changed, but I know some talking points have been made, and hopefully we'll be making those adjustments. Specific to the show, I'm in 2 roles right now. I'm the field team lead, and I'm also the showrunner. But boots on the ground, like the field team, we only have a limited number of people that can show up for that. So I'm going to ask Richard Lavery to come in and help show run on Saturday for sure. And I might ask Emma to come in on Sunday as well. So we'll see what that shapes into. But essentially, it's weird to plan everything and then relinquish those duties to somebody else. But that's what's amazing about this community is I can trust people that have great backgrounds to come in and fill in as needed, and I'll fill whatever role is needed for that as well. But that's my quick kind of 2 cents of the notes I have.
How many teams are we going to have on the ground?
So 2, because we went from 8 volunteers, we're down to about 5 now. So it'll probably be 3 and 2 on the ground. And Jeffrey Powers will be at both on air, and George Whittam will be for NAMM, and then Guy Cochran will be for CineGear.
And I know that we've had trouble getting a live view, so do we have any way to broadcast out?
Yes. Yeah. So we're still, Plan A is still the live view for the main kit. Plan B is the net, Mr. Net system that we have. So I do have 2 of those, one from me and one from the Mr. Net team, which they'll send me. So those are ready to go. So we can pretty much move forward on those if need
I think
be.
we should at this point. I haven't been able to solve the live view problem. We thought we had it solved in a couple different ways, and we don't have any. So we should probably, and one thing that we should do is just, I like to get rid of variables. And so I think that we just move to using Mr. Net. And then are we looking at using Mr. Net for the, we're looking at using it for the main camera. So you're going to use an FS5 for that?
I think so. So with the Mr. Net, it's internet only, right? So it doesn't do any hardware encoding. Right. So we need some sort of encoding system and then de-encode it on the other side, or go through Stream Voodoo if we do phones. So there's still several options there. Yeah.
And Stream Voodoo has offered that. So it's just a matter of, I don't know, that wouldn't help your FS5 issue.
Sure.
But it would help with the phone. So we can, they've been able to make that available to us. Yeah.
And to me, it's really whatever system makes the most sense, best idea wins. And so we'll think through each variable and then figure out from what we have, which one makes the most sense in that situation.
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah, and so for all of you watching, if you have questions, if you don't have questions, it'll be a short hour as far as how we do these. But otherwise, if you have questions, go ahead and throw those in right now. Let's go ahead and jump into the first question.
First one comes from Sky Gleason here on the panel from Seattle, Washington. What edited and produced packages has our community appreciated from past office hours in-person live events?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I liked the stuff that was prepared ahead of time for the office hour space broadcast. It was interesting to get a background and see behind the scenes and the construction of the rocket and so on. And for the NAMM show and for the Cine Gear, I might suggest if we know something if we want to see something, some piece of hardware that is a certain manufacturer, that we go to that manufacturer's website, download any videos that they have on that specific piece of hardware, and maybe be able to show that before we come to the booth of that person. And that way the people viewing and the people submitting questions can see the product, know what it's about, know what its purpose is, know how it's used before we get to a live person that we can ask questions about that specific product. So it gives people a good background on the product. And most companies will release, on the day of their press announcements, they'll release a press package, which may have nicely produced video packages on a specific new product.
Go ahead, Sky.
This is awesome information, and I'd love some more conversation about this because we're creating these packages now. We don't have Chris Fenwick is very busy in his own life and business life. So he was a big force of nature at the OH Space event in creating the physical text and then creating some of the foundation of that. We are very fortunate to have Michael Sweeney in Chicago and in Australia. Adrian, Adrian is participating as professional experienced editors, but I'm looking forward to Courtney's point in once we get that footage to be able to trim it down and make it available. And yes, we're also creating, Alex, a backbone of LucidLink is becoming a huge asset of a single digital bucket for us all to, and very securely, to JJ's point, very securely give access to those that need it. And it's becoming a huge backbone for us.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, and this is great to talk about and conceptualize and just as a bigger, broader stroke of like what is working for our audience, which is what I love about Sky. He always takes us back to like, what do we want to see as the audience? And you'll see that we're narrowing our focus, right? So we're running out of time, which also forces us to do that as well. And this helps kind of prioritize what we're going to be focused on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, my big recommendation is just from my experience is just to minimize the amount of editing required so that you can add things to it, but whatever your core content, whatever the core coverage is as much all in one as possible so that you can just, if you want to add inserts, if you want to add more graphics over top of it, it works. But it also works if you just head and tail it and put it into the playout. So we just want to make sure that we can keep our mind, keep focused on that because we'll produce a lot more content that way. Next question.
Sky Gleason, Washington, D.C. Noah, how have you combined your equipment with others' equipment and tools?
Go ahead, Noah.
I think tools is the right word there because, lots of us have different varying equipment with different preferences and stuff, but it has to be the right tool to fit the right need. And so that's what I'm realizing is, Guy comes with a set of equipment, Jeffrey Powers, myself. And so at the end of the day, we just need the tool to execute on the need. Right. And so that's kind of what we're looking at specifically. I think a lot of the gear will come from me on this one. And then I'm communicating with the other teams and the ground crew to see like, what do we need? We need a camera, we need a microphone, we need a wireless transmitter, those kind of things. And then we'll fit the tools to those needs.
Do we have the wireless stuff set up or do we still need to get that sorted?
The wireless transmitter receivers are still MIA for now. So we do have wired options, but if I forgot the brand you mentioned, but like if we were able to rent those locally.
Yeah, we should do some research on the Electrosonics. I haven't been able to get them. The stock is complicated for everybody. Yeah. So I think that's the.
Yeah, I do have transmitter receivers, but they're rack mounted, so we have to have some sort of other. I did order the GoDocs one that were recommended by Carl, but they're not going to be in time, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that if we're using phones for any of that stuff, of course, getting like a Saramonic, lightning or whatever to to the phone will be useful too. And so
I actually have 2 of those, plus I have dual wireless. So Noah, let me ship some stuff to you.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. And then we do have an iPhone adapter that gives us both an RJ45, so Ethernet connection to the Mr. Net box,
Right.
plus a USB, which the Mix Pre 3 can act as an interface. So that would be really nice to have that as our combo as well.
the one thing I would say is that the Mix Pre 3 with not getting external power, just get a lot of batteries. Get the bigger battery pack because it just sucks those batteries. It just if it doesn't have external input of power, it just annihilates the batteries. So just keep that in mind. It's you either need a lot of rechargeables or a lot of alkalines or a lot of whatever, but it's a beast when it comes to batteries. Courtney's, I think, agreeing with the.
And if it tries to pull power over that USB-C connector, which is what it's want to do, if you have an early the first one, the version 1 of the Mix Pre 3, you could only feed power in over that USB-C. And it didn't have a separate power connector. That is death because it'll drag down an iPhone or whatever you plug into it.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
And pull its batteries.
I don't think the iPhone, if you do it to an iPad, I think it will pull the power. I don't think an iPhone will allow it to. I don't think the iPhone will power an external device. Like it doesn't allow that through the Lightning.
But it's your only way of bringing power into the earlier. If you get a
no, it is. That's the problem.
That's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to split that out again to have 2 Lightnings. It turns into a dongle mess.
Yeah, and the dongle that I got has the 2 ports I mentioned, plus it has a Thunderbolt port. Whatever it's called for
Lightning.
power for the Lightning port.
Okay, so it's got the Ethernet, HDMI, or Ethernet, USB, and power.
Correct.
That's good. Yeah, that should work.
So I'll use all 3 ports and see if that will do the trick.
Yeah. That's definitely something we want to test. And we may want to think about with the phones how we're going to rig those up. I think the small rig stuff has a pretty good possibility. So let us know what. Yeah, I think that's going to be a good one. Next question.
And I apologize. Apparently, my leaf blower guys outside have souped up and have gone to go-kart racing instead, and it's driving me nuts. Noah Sargent from Fullerton. Alex, can you talk about some big-picture goals you have for these projects?
Well, I think that the biggest goal is that there's a real benefit to all of us to work together on this. To plan out a project, to work on a project together, to build. We're learning we're going to learn a lot about LucidLink over the next couple weeks that we didn't know, and they're providing, the server space and the support and all the other things. And so we wouldn't get to do that otherwise. And I think that as we do great work, we'll get more opportunities like that. Like we reached out to some vendors that weren't able to supply stuff because of supply chain issues this time, but literally said, please contact us for the next one. Like, we're totally interested, totally ready to help. We just can't do it on this one. So, this is when we're just getting started. We're just trying to figure it out. It's just based on this show mostly, right? When we start producing great content, a lot of other vendors will want to help us. So we're, piecing it together and doing the best we can on this one. But I think that, if we do a good job on these, if we produce good content, that's a big jump forward from NAB, and the next one's a big jump forward from this one. We're going to get to a point where we're producing incredible content. We get to experiment with how do we produce an event at a global level. How do we have people all over the world, being part of a production and making all of that work. Now, the other thing that it does is it definitely increases the, over time, if we do it well, increases the stature of office hours, which makes it easier to get better people for second hours. It makes it easier to get support for what we're doing. It also improves the position of everybody in the group. So that's another thing. And then it also provides a great service for the industry where we actually, I think, can be an amplification for a lot of these events. These events are going to keep on getting smaller. There's going to be less people that are going to them physically. And the vendors that show up at the expo need to know that they got a great ROI. If we're doing really slick, we're not doing some really slick yet, but imagine we get to a point where we're doing really slick, high-end things that gets lots of people to go to their website. All they're going to measure from it is, I went to Cine Gear and I got a ton of views on my website. Where those views came from and whether it was Cine Gear or our broadcasts or whatever I mean, they'll matter, but they'll go, well, I have to go back to CineGear because that's where I got covered, right? And so the thing is that it's good for CineGear for us to be, and good for NAMM for us to be covering this stuff and broadcasting it out, because it gives people a reason to go to those things. Because otherwise, I don't know, the other, the other option is, and I always think it's funny if we get any resistance to going to the conferences, because my other option, if conferences don't let us stream or don't let us do whatever, is that we'll get much more aggressive about covering all of these vendors throughout the year. And so the thing is that, if they don't let us go, we'll just change the business model to, let's just cover it heavily and make the second hours 2 hours and, do more PR. And then people will start to wonder why they're going to the conferences at all. But right now the conferences are really convenient for us, because it means in one place we can gather a whole bunch of people. And as long as it's convenient for us, then we'll keep on taking advantage of that opportunity. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, and this is why, Coach Lindsay, you're helping us keep our elbows in. Is every time I've talked to these vendors now, they all go, you guys always look so good.
Right.
They can't help themselves. But when a team from office hours shows up, they're taken aback by just even this appearance. So,
right. Well, and that's why if we keep on moving that, all those little things that, all the work the panel's done and all the work that we do in the back end, all those things, make all of this a lot easier. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, it's really true. I've said this before, but like the skills of all these folks basically just multiply and add to each other and make the product that much better, which is awesome. And so I'm just excited to see us go as far as we can. And I also understand, like, looking at the 30,000 foot view, this is going to be an iterative process, right? We're going to continually get better and better each time. And so I know some of us have like the perfectionist mindset of like, it's got to be as good as it can be, but at the same time, we got to get it done. Right. We got to get the ball moving. And so project 2, which is what this is, versus 10 or 20 is going to be completely different for sure.
Yeah. And, we used to say the first is the worst, that the early ones are always going to be you figuring it out. Now, the one thing I will say is that we want to be careful of not spreading too little jam over too much bread. So one of the things is, if it looks like our resources are limited or things aren't working, we should do a shorter. I mean, I don't care if we do 1 hour, coverage of just a hit, or 2 hours of coverage. We don't need to make it into a long thing if we don't have enough content to cover it. So we want to make sure that we, mix the right amount of content to the, the resources that we actually have. Go ahead, Sky.
And to your homogeny of the globe, is what's fun is this tiny team has done a couple of 3 different projects together, and each time has expanded. Different players have come in and gone out, and we're getting additional players now, and we're starting to seeing consistency and continuity in systems and patterns. That's why I'm so grateful for Michael jumping in with his broadcast experience in Chicago, and then from Australia, from Adrian coming in with his broadcast experience. So we're creating our own culture. And that's been the challenge as well, because one person calls one thing a blue, the other one calls it purple. It's like, well, what do we call it? And let's settle on something. It's been happening.
No.
Yeah, it's absolutely true that the content will ultimately determine like 90% of our show, like the content itself, and then obviously the volunteer staff of like who we can fit where and for how much time. So that's kind of like an open-ended thing, is like, this is the time slot we're aiming for, but everybody should understand that will shrink or might even expand depending on how well the content is going.
Yeah. Next question.
Next one comes from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris says, do we have an idea of the bandwidth that Mr. Net will provide?
Yeah, based off of the first tests that we did, and we did have a Mr. Net at NAB, which went fairly well. We could expect a upload of like 15-ish, which is pretty decent, and then a download of like 50 megabits per second. So hopefully that will be consistent. They are rated for more than that. They can do more than that, but just from the tests that I've done and seen, I think that's a rough average that I found.
Next question.
Next one comes from Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany. And Stefan says, did you make a digital plan for the whole thing like the H2R gear?
Go ahead, Noah.
Sort of. We're actually using Google Docs of some sort. Josh might be able to talk to that a little bit. We did get some pushback on the first couple iterations from previous projects that like us as producers, we might conceptualize what the flow looks like, but that will ultimately be determined by the engineer, which in this case is JJ and Mickey. Josh, did you want to mention any of that or show any of that right now?
Sure. Yeah, we typically will start drawing out a concept. And what that does is it helps us it's sort of a pathfinding way of figuring out which people need to connect to who, how the connections and the relationships happen between people, a bit of a flow diagram. I didn't pull the last. I could pull up the NAB one, but I don't have it to hand just at the moment. And it's a sort of pathfinding exercise. And when we get them shaped out, it's a good thing to show people where they are in that process and who their immediate contacts need to be and how the flow of information has. So it's something that's better as a visual. Just sort of a very easy. I've just used Google Drawing to do it just because it's a very easy and quick thing to add and modify. And oftentimes we'll have to change things. Specifically, the H2R gear is good for the nuts and bolts of the actual specific connections, but there's more broader concepts that you have with a flow diagram to show people. As far as the nuts and bolts, we're basically augmenting the OH 2.0 system. So we're taking what we know and grafting on what we need after it.
Go ahead, Sky.
I just want to affirm Josh, because in the last 3 months, he comes in with, I want to do this thing. And I spent all this time on it. And we all kind of went, that's great, but how do we modify, adapt it? And to have him talking about, yes, we are modifying and adapting as a first line comment, I'm grateful for Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Well, it happens to come from Josh Kaufman, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and he asks, what is the impression that our observers would walk away with at the conclusion of these upcoming events? Observing vendors, viewers, traditional coverage of shows?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, sorry, Bill's yard crew has come over to my yard now. What I'd like to see is the ability to go beyond what's available from traditional marketing for specific vendors and getting that information. That's one reason I go to trade shows, is to ask the difficult questions, to know the marketing that's available on a new product that I want to find out about, know what they're publishing about that product, but then go beyond that, find the product manager who can answer the difficult questions that aren't answered by the marketing material that's generally available on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Noah.
I think the main takeaway for me was the magic around the Mukana questions, right? So we have an audience who's curious, but can't really attend and can't really go about certain questions, about certain thoughts, but then we are able to connect those folks to the experts, right? And then not only that is we can vote up which one is the most popular for our audience as a whole. And so bringing the question to the answer, right, is huge. And so to do that specifically for a niche is awesome. And connecting the audience to the show is a big thing.
Yeah, I think that there's an amplification that we're bringing to the show. There's a lot of people covering the show, some people covering the shows. In fact, I would probably say in both of these shows, I would be surprised if it was more than 6 to 8 groups that are probably covering the shows. I mean, there might be a little bit of something, but as far as real video, these are smaller shows. And so they're not like NAB or CES. And so I think it'll be a smaller group. And I think that the amplification of having the hosts, all the panel of talking about all these things and creating context from all over the world and and adding to that. And then the questions from the audience, I think, is something that no one else is doing. So I think it's a real opportunity for us to stretch just in that area. And if we can create a technically strong show as well, I think that it's a pretty exciting thing to do. Next question.
Next one comes from Mickey Macador in the Philippines. And Mickey says, what part of the process has surprised the team as being easier than expected thus far?
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, working with Eric Nathan and creating a structure inside of LucidLink, this has been the bane of my existence for the last 3 projects of where do we digitally store this media in the cloud, and it's easy and accessible and secure, again, to JJ's point, and consequently to watch a LucidLink, but also the homogenization again of systems coming together and agreeing that this needs to be the input folder, this needs to be the output folder, coming up with a language, a lexicon within our culture. That's been not surprising, but a great deal of joy for me.
Yeah, absolutely, Bill.
The strength of the team, the strength of the individuals. I mean, there's so many things that I'm not good at that this show does really, really well because of the breadth of knowledge, the back end knowledge, the technical chops that will not, in 4 lifetimes, I couldn't learn anywhere close to as much as the team behind the scene here brings to this show every day. And not only do I get to learn from them and become aware of things, but it does truly make any part that I might play on the show easier, because I don't have to constantly worry about, will this work? Will that work? Will something fail and it reflect badly on all of us because somebody wasn't watching that button? Everybody, there are multiple eyes on all the buttons, and that makes it a safer place to take chances than I've ever been in before.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, and I think this might happen differently over time, but I was a little worried about people taking me as a leader, and I don't know if that was just like the self-esteem part of it, or the self vision of who I am, but I felt like people went with it, and I was expecting more pushback, which I was kind of surprised and happy that I didn't get. And I guess just showing my work and organizing and putting stuff together just proved that we had a game plan. And the thing that was harder than I expected, though, were really the crevices and the details of all the different things that need to come together and the decisions that need to be made. There's so many decisions that need to be made.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
And I think one thing that we've gotten better at is delegating things to others, compartmentalizing certain groups. And Noah uses a phrase a lot of times. He's going to empower people to have their vision on it, which is nice because we're kind of coming around to the our second time of doing these shows. So the first time is just completely wide open, and the projects sort of shuffle down into what resources we have, time and availability. And that's been the deciding factor in the past, but having other people take different departments with their own vision is really nice to see where they head with that. We have people that are overseeing the different panel and anchors, and so they're formulating their teams. It's something that's it's a lot more rank and file as far as organization. Different people have their teams lined up. We have something to look back on. So I think it's a little easier going back the second time. And we've been able to, I think, expand a little bit by letting other people try to expand their individual areas into what vision they have for how it could be.
Next question.
Next one comes from Mickey again, and he says, what part of the process has surprised the team as being more challenging than expected thus far?
Go ahead, Noah.
I think there are a lot of things that have been customized by a certain fix by a certain person, right? So when we're doing production, sometimes we just make it work. And so we figure out our way of doing something, and that's great. We're problem solvers, and that's awesome. But what we also have to consider is the scalable solution, right? The scalable fix that works not just for us, but for everybody. And to have that be a fixable thing on that large scale, it's got to be known by everybody. It's got to be repeatable, clear, simple, and thought through and documented.
Yeah. Good, Sky.
The creativity that Chris Fenwick brought. So the biggest challenge is he's not available for this project because he is a multi-talented, multi-ability, multi-experienced human, and he brought a lot of that all with his force of nature to the previous projects, and he's not available. So we're observing some holes in our processes here. It's producers that produce content and write it and structure it and edit it, and so these are challenges that we're finding new talent.
Go ahead, Josh.
And I don't know if it's that much as unexpected, but we've done the first iterations of things, and now we're doing two at once. So in a pretty close sequence from the NAMM to the Cine Gear. And it has I would say the expected challenges, but having some people that are unique to each teams is really helpful because they're really focused on their projects.
The next question.
Next one comes from Noah Sargent in Fullerton, and it's for me, actually. Has it been more exciting or more challenging to find cinema experts for the CineGear panel? And the answer to that is yes, both of those cases. I will tell you, one of the things, I didn't realize how tough the pandemic has been for this side of the industry until I started reaching out to some of my old friends in the industry, because I've been in this for a long time, and I've dealt with rental houses in my local area, and I've known some people nationally who are very good at things like jibs and some of the bigger equipment. And it's a mess out there. The pandemic has hit those industries particularly hard, I think. Production shut down. People who had been in it for decades either retired or decided. One of the guys in Los Angeles who has been one of the gurus that I've listened to for a long time literally left the country for just about 2 years ago and hasn't come back yet. And so everywhere I'm looking, I'm seeing the results of what the pandemic has done in that back end of the industry in the big equipment. It's been sitting on shelves and people have been holding on by their fingernails. I am truly hoping that we can use CineGear, at least in part, to start maybe knitting together whatever that community is going to look like for the future, because it is very, very important. If any of us want to be able to get into those big jobs and have things like large cranes and jibs available for the big jobs, if all of them go out of business, what are we going to do? I guess we're going to probably have to fly drones for every single shot, but there are some things that drones are really good at, and there are some things, at least at this point, that an operator on something, putting a guy up on a cherry picker 100 feet over something, that brain can get you a different set of reactivity than the pilot on the ground trying to do it. So I don't want to see this part of the industry diminish any more than it's already been it.
Next question.
Lenny Nelson in San Antonio, Texas. When do you think you'd be ready to promote this event coverage beyond just the regular office hours audience?
Go ahead, Noah.
I think it's after we have an event that 95% or more of the variables are worked out, right? We're still early in this stage, and that's why it's important to have that big picture in mind. Is yes, we're doing a show, like I said before, and we want that to be great, but we're not going to get to all the variables, and we don't know what we don't know, right? And so you got to iterate through the process. And after these shows, we might feel like we're there, but honestly, we probably won't be. It might be another show after that or another show after that. So we'll see. We need to iterate and move forward and try to get that figured out as much as we can. The other thing I'll say too is we're for office hours specifically, we're niched around the technology field, right, and the media field and what we're doing here. So there might be other events outside of this that we could expand to in the future too.
Go ahead, Sky.
And again, many of us do this for a living, and we work with crews for a specific product to promote or sell, and consequently we get paid. So we're very focused in making an event happen. Office hours is all volunteer. All the equipment is all whatever we can borrow, beg, or not steal. We don't steal, but we do borrow a lot and partner. So that creates a different timeline of when the next thing it will be. What the quality of a thing will be, and so that we've done 3 of them in the last 6 months is pretty phenomenal. And we're iterating as Noah and Josh have mentioned, and we're expanding the knowledge base. So don't know when.
Yeah, one additional thing. I know Jeffrey was planning on covering or attending InfoComm, which is just a few days before NAMM or before CineGear in Vegas. Are we going to do any coverage on that, or just incidental reporting?
I think Jeffrey's going to do some after hours stuff. I will admit that in between these two is WWDC, which we'll talk about tomorrow. And so I just felt like InfoComm was another thing that I can't, it came in at a time that after I've already committed to WWDC, NAMM and CineGear, that was just too many things in 1 week for me to add another thing that we're going to try to cover, because our coverage of WWDC, which we'll talk about tomorrow, is going to be pretty intensive. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, as well as Monday night, and I'm working on a concert for Monday night. We'll see if it turns out, but hopefully I'll know by tomorrow, and by tomorrow's show. And so there's a lot going on that week, and so I just wasn't able to make Infocom work.
Maybe Jeffrey can generate a highlights reel or something.
Well, and he's going to do something from after hours. So we're going to work out an after hours afternoon, on a Thursday or whatever for him to do. So I think that we will get coverage of that, and we will put it into the email and make sure everybody knows that it's happening. And so I definitely want to take advantage of the fact that Jeffrey's there. But I don't think I can add any more to the plate. The one that I expect to do at a higher level is October 19th to 20th. That's NAB show, New York. So just so you know, like in my eyes, we do these. We'd find some informal ones over the summer that we can do. We maybe go to SIGGRAPH if people are interested in going to SIGGRAPH. We find out how well our European contingent can handle IBC. IBC is just a treasure trove of stuff because it's all stuff we don't see normally. I used to go to IBC all the time. And so there's a lot at IBC to cover, and we'll see if there's enough the European contingent, if they can, pull up together to do something. But the next one what I'm hoping is that we learn enough and we plan out far enough that we can go to NAB. The nice thing about the NAB show in New York is it's so much smaller. It's just really easy. It's like Cine Gear size, except in New York. And so I think that there's an opportunity for us to really turn the gas on and see if we can't find, really, if we start now thinking about it, getting cameras and getting transmission and getting the OKs and everything else, that we could hit that one pretty hard. And that basically that sets us up for, CES and the next NAB. And so, if we think about that cycle, I think that by the next NAB, we could potentially be the biggest game in town. Like if we work hard at what we're doing now. And again, I think there was a question about this last time. I don't think there's really any, we're not really competing. Everybody's covering it and everyone's going to do it. It's not going to be like, because we're doing it, no one else is doing it. It just means that we can, get a lot of support from a lot of folks to make it happen and just make a big splash. But I don't think it's going to negatively affect anybody else's coverage of the process or their business model. We're not really I don't think we're in the same business as everybody else. Bill, and then Noah, real quick. We're running out of time.
Just real quick, I just want to talk about you might not have heard, we've not scaled back, but we're focusing our coverage of CineGear on just Saturday, and that is because in terms of the rehearsal schedules and everything else, coming out of the big WWDC work, trying to get reset and then get human beings into the place, because Jeffrey's in one place and Guy's in another place, and we have to bring them in. That's why Saturday will be our day, and we're also constrained by the show's open hours. So we'll have a lot of talking about when we're going to be live. So look for it.
Yeah, go ahead, Noah.
To Bill's point, yeah, we have to keep the big picture in mind, and that's another thing is like we're a show, but we fit within the OH system, right? And so whether it's WWDC or the other events that we plan to do in the future, we'll eventually have some sort of approval process and voting structure. Because if we don't have boots on the ground, it's going to be harder to cover a conference, So there's going to be certain things that we need to hash out over time.
Next question.
Next one comes from Josh Kaufman, who was just speaking. Noah, I hear today is the last day to join the NAMM show team. How do we sign up?
Yeah, so the two best ways. One, if you check your email from the webinar link that gets sent out every morning by Alex, there are links there that you can fill out a form, right? We actually have a second form that's more detailed oriented that you'll fill out next. But do that form first, or you can Discord myself or Josh, and we'll send you the information from there. And again, that cuts off for NAMM today, and CineGear will be next week for the cutoff.
Next question.
Oh, Cindy Drosden, I'm sorry for the sound. Erie, Colorado. I appreciate office hours and would like to contribute if I can. What volunteer jobs might be available for someone with no professional video or audio experience?
Go ahead, Josh.
Well, Cindy, we're doing a show about cameras and audio equipment and tech, but it doesn't necessarily mean in order to participate in the production of a show that you have to know about the subject material intimately or more so than anybody else. So if you can drive a spreadsheet or a calendar or a Word doc, then it's skills that are tremendously helpful in administration, coordinating people. So yeah, go ahead, sign up. We'd love to have you on the team.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about these projects is that we get to learn things that we don't know. I mean, we're the folks, almost everybody's doing something that's not what they do on a daily basis. And so, so I think that, and I think that's a real great opportunity to for all of us to learn together. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, again, I don't want to put people round pegs in square holes. And that's where I want us to all learn something that we maybe haven't done before, but maybe there is a gift or a skill or a talent that you can bring that we didn't even think about, because the example is kind of the hero of the office hour space experience was Eric. Came out and did barbecue. Drove all the way from Kansas City and fed the whole team. So how's your cookie skills?
I think we should get Cindy to turn some great handles for our rigs. You know, I think that could be another thing too. She's got Ash flew all the way out from New Jersey and had never manned a camera before, and he was there. So Discord first, and then participate, start asking questions. And there's plenty to do online, so you don't have to fly in. I just want to make sure you're clear. There's plenty to do online, and that you can help with as far as organization of that process. When you look at any given show, there's 90% of the folks that could be doing it from anywhere. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, that's why on major movies and stuff, they have accountants and they have coordinators and they have all sorts of stuff on the back end of support. So that was one of the things early on I thought editors were short of, and now we have a surplus, which is great. But specifically admin and leaders we're short of. So we could always use support there. And I'll also highlight somebody, Laura, who came in with very limited experience over the course of 2 years now, has developed into a great resource. And so she's leading our back end team, which is awesome.
And to correct you, no, we do not have a surplus of editors. We have a lot of people in the story making team and a couple of editors. So
next question.
Michael Vosby in Woodstock, Georgia. Do you think that companies are deciding that their money is better spent nowadays producing their own video content rather than attending trade shows like NAMM?
Well, I think that actually the kind of stuff that we're talking about doing could theoretically validate going to things like NAMM, because the reason that we can expend the energy to go to NAMM is because a whole bunch of companies are all in one place. So I think that there is a big future, whether it's us or all the people like us. The point is that being more available to be covered, to be at a venue where more people can cover you with video and create that content would actually make it more useful to be at a conference. If you're going for foot traffic, these conferences will not last long on foot traffic alone, because I just think that, I think that NAMM and CineGear are in a slightly different place. They're a smaller event, and they are also, a lot of what they do is heavy LA focus. There's a lot of people just in LA that will go to these things. But when you think of the larger conferences that require you to go to a city that you're not doing production in, like NAB and other things like that, I think that that's a harder row. But I think that if they engage more in making it easier and easier for folks like us, and if we're successful at what we do, and other people are successful at what they do in coverage, it makes it worth it for the vendors. But I do think that there is going to be a growing amount of demand for vendors to do other things. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I think it's two sides of a coin too, in the sense like you need discovery, right? People who know nothing about your brand to find you, which is kind of what Alex was just talking about. And that's what's key about a conference is like people can walk the floor and discover you in that sense. And then the other side of it's the knowledge base of like you want to get your information out. And that's, I think, what the question's also talking about a little bit too, is could that money be better spent on your own show? I think in some ways, yes, if that's what you're focused on. Versus like if nobody knows your brand and you need to get discovered, then conferences are probably a better spend.
Yep. Go ahead, Josh.
More specifically to your question is, are companies deciding that? And some, yes, but in the large part, no, either because they're just kind of doing what they know, or you're returning to what they feel is normal. So for the most part, I don't think companies are deciding it.
A lot of them are deciding no. You look at the size of NAB, like a lot of people decided no. So that's I think that's the challenge. Go ahead, Courtney.
As far as announcing new products, that's a different consideration. But as far as getting feedback, I think is one of the important parts of a trade show for existing products. So a manufacturer that's had a product out for 1 year, and this is their 1 year anniversary returning to a trade show. They get the product managers out there to field the feedback from the field, which is something they're not necessarily going to get unless they're monitoring forums very closely online. They'll get use cases they hadn't thought of before for their products, and they'll find out that people are using their products for something completely that they never thought of out of the box. So that kind of feedback can develop into better products, and that's something you can only get with a two-way conversation.
My only question is whether that two-way conversation has to happen in person, or whether, we do a lot of two-way conversations here too. So I'm not totally sold that it's going to be necessary in the future. It's just that they have to put the time in to build communities that are maybe not exactly like what we do here, but similar, where they're constantly, daily interacting with their users. And the folks that really understand their products, they have forums and they're having all kinds of meetings and sessions, and they really get to know it. And it can be done over time. But it takes an effort. And the reality, though, is if you look at the cost of the booth, you can hire it for the cost of one booth for one show. You could hire a whole staff for a year. To take care of people and do live streams and Q&As every week or every day. It's because the installation is so expensive. So I don't know, again, because you're also only getting the subsample of people who show up. Go ahead, Bill.
I was also saying, though, there's some smart companies, and a lot of companies are revving, right? Some companies that have been in this for decades are kind of diminishing, and some of the young, more technically advanced companies are coming up. There is less noise at these conventions now. You're seeing some of the big players pull out. And so if you really do have something innovative and you can come to one of these shows and be a bigger fish in a smaller pond rather than going up against the monsters who've been there for 30 years, it might be a good investment for you, particularly if groups like ours are leveraging your exposure out into the world via what we do.
Right. Next question.
Next question from Albie Lopez in San Antonio, Texas, about Cine Gear. What have you all learned so far about working with a volunteer team covering these kind of events?
Go ahead, Noah.
I love this question. This is great. I think the key thing as a leader, at least from my perspective, is that delegation, right? And empowering people of saying, like, I'm not going to do everything myself. I need the team to come together to make this happen. You have to trust your team too, right? That's the next step. And you can go further, farther, faster with a team and utilizing everybody's capabilities. And then the final thing for me would be like the follow-up structure and the deadlines that we set. Like, those are universal. Everybody needs those.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, watching Noah grab a hold of his leadership skills, that's been a joy for me. And the challenge of doing the impossible. I love the OH space thing was started because somebody says, well, you can't broadcast from the desert. And somebody said, oh yeah. And so that gauntlet of doing things for positive and helping a culture or a community advance in their own skills and collectively get closer and tighter together. That's my joy of this.
Go, Josh.
Typically, projects for profit grow to the size of their budget, skill level, or opportunity. The neat thing about volunteers is it's kind of like the stone soup version of things. You start with a stone pot. And, if we just had maybe just a little bit more, we could make this better. But either way, we'll go forward with what we have. And so it's been important, I've seen, in making sure that the needs are known to the community. Here's the need for this, and then things appear. It's just making sure that communication works out well, so people understand just what needs there are, and then empowering people to put their own mark on things, have be able to make their own mark on the show has been really helpful.
I've worked with volunteer teams for a long time, pretty much since I was on them a lot before I was 20, and then I ran teams and then of hundreds of people sometimes, of all volunteers, and I was a volunteer while I was doing that. It's the most valuable training for management known to man, or women. Like it is. There's two things about volunteering. Number one is you tend, if you have something that's interesting, tend to have more people. So you tend to have, a lot of times when you're doing a little event like this, if we were covering this event and we had a sponsor, we'd have like 4 people, 3 people doing this because that's what we could afford to pay and that's what we could fly in and that's what we could do, whatever. When you're volunteers, you tend to be able to build larger teams, but then at the same time, those teams are not being paid. They're not there just for the paycheck. They're there because they're engaged, they're interested, they're getting something out of it. And so as a manager, you have to be aware of what's their end of this all the time. And I think that those two things of working with larger teams than you would normally work with, as well as having to keep them focused on the cathedral, so to speak, instead of cutting the stone, is important. If you're paying people well enough, you can have them cut the stone for a long time. They don't need to know about the cathedral. If you're not, they have to know what the cathedral looks like all the time. Or they won't cut the stone for much longer. So you just have to. It's a really, really powerful way to learn how to manage. Next question.
Mickey Macacor in the Philippines, building on Courtney's sentiments, how crucial is having the ability for the panel to have a two-way conversation with field reporters and interviewees?
Go ahead, Noah.
This has been discussed extensively. So the short answer for the two projects, NAMM, we are going to refrain from doing that two-way conversation because the noise floor level will be substantial, right? So you're at a music show, so there's going to be lots of drums and guitars and amps and stuff that produce a lot of sound. And so instead of having to worry about like in-ears and switching out headphones and that kind of stuff, we're going to sustain from NAMM. But CineGear should be a different show, right? And so if we are able to do that two-way, which would be magic, I would love to have that. That will happen for CineGear and not for NAMM. Now, I'll also say we have a follow-up tag that we're considering as well for our panelists, because as Courtney noted in our follow-up meeting post NAB, having that follow-up response to something they just said would be awesome to just promote that to the top. And then the boots on the ground team, the field reporter, is going to have an iPad or a phone to see the top question, right? So they'll be able to basically have that follow-up asked right away.
We're going to go real quick because we're running out of time. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Textual communications between the field reporter and the panel is probably the best way to go, because handling feedback loops over audible speakers, if the person you're interviewing has to be able to hear the question if you're going to do it audio wise, and avoiding feedback is going to definitely require a sound mixer at the location, be able to control the volume of the microphone down when the speaker's up and the speaker down when the microphone's up, etc. But so text communication solves that problem.
Now, I will say that one thing that we could look at is just in ear for the interview, for the our field reporter, because I've done that a lot, really successfully.
That can be done, but you can't really, so they can relay the question to them.
Yeah, but you could also ask them about, hey, check this out. It's not just relaying the question, because this team will decide what they want to do as far as coverage. I only interview highly technical people at the booth, and generally still, I don't think that they are able to talk about their own product very well. Most of what if it was me, most of what I would do is be the field person on the ground answering questions about it. And if I need to ask somebody, I would. But a lot of times I'm standing in front of the product and I can point to the part that you're asking about and say what it is, as opposed to interviewing the person, which again, over time, I slowly stopped doing, unless the person was someone that they just can't just be a booth operator. They have to really know the product really deeply. And then again, it is just, you're absolutely right. It's just relaying it, but it still can get them the question. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, again, relationships. What happened at NAB was at the Frame.io booth, somehow the monitor got turned around and the gentleman at Frame.io says, "Hey, isn't that Bill Davis?" And so consequently, the challenge that Courtney you're talking about is, how do we stay with the connections and relationship building that's happening? Also rehearsal, because if Jeff says, "Yeah, I need somebody in my ear," Jeff Power says, "No, don't talk to me. I'll just get confused." So that's why we're rehearsing. And some of these things we're iterating from show to show, as Noah just mentioned.
Yeah, and that's the difference between someone who does a ton of live and someone who doesn't do as much live, as, on the field. Because someone who does a ton of live always wants someone in their ear. It's like they got to have someone talking, tell them where they're at. And someone who doesn't do as much live interaction, it's more of a one-person show, can get very disoriented by it. We find that that's a common thing. So yeah, knowing what people are comfortable with.
That's that square peg round hole thing that we're iterating.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we're getting closer. We'll talk about it again next week, see how we're doing. And by the way, Lucid Link is going to be on Tuesday to talk more about it to all of you, so you all know what we're all working on. So it's pretty cool stuff. And we're going to be hopefully using them for a bunch of products and projects. So stay tuned for that. And thank you to our producers for all the great questions and keeping the conversation moving forward. Thank you to our panelists. Can't do this without you. And we also can't do it without all the folks in the back end. Just doing such a great job pulling this all together. So it's quite a show. no one would be talking to us if all those three groups weren't doing what we're doing every day. So thanks to everybody. All right, let's jump into after hours. I think
There's Alex Lindsay as a host. It says it right there on the card.
Mitchell.
I want to know the name of the operator of the lawnmower.
Are you haunting him and he's not even here?
Mitchell.
Want to say excellent timing because the yard crew just walked away.
Alan, thank you. Look at that. Noah got his name on the list.
All right. I'm going now.
Good night, Mr. Lindsay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Hi, Mom. For the win.